Welcome to the Finance and Facilities Committee meeting for the School District of Waukesha. Tanya, can you verify that the meeting has been properly posted?
Yes, it has.
Okay, great. Moving on, there is an opportunity for public comment. Do we have any that signed up to speak?
We have none.
Fantastic. All right, moving into our action items. The first action item is the approval of minutes.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And one abstain. Passes 4-0-1. The next action item is the approval of vouchers. Did we have any questions this month?
We did have one question relating to the water now that we've transferred over to Milwaukee Water. And the request was to match March of '24 to March of '23. In March of '23, the cost was $33,363.40. And in March of '24, our costs were $39,435.74, a difference of just over $6,000 or an 18% increase.
Interesting. Any other questions, discussion items? Not, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the vouchers.
So moved.
A second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Passes 5-0. The next discussion and possible action item is surrounding the 2024-2025 health insurance plan. Mr. Clark.
Yeah, I loaded some information related to the history of our deductible. We have a high deductible plan, so there's no co-pays and things to talk about under our health plan, but every year at this time, we go through and have the board, unless there's absolutely no changes, we just roll forward, approve any changes, and we're recommending a change in the deductible for next year. And this is just part of our normal budget development process. So the information I included in the attachment is our rates as of today and how they're broken. I thought it'd be helpful to see how we go through all these different calculations for school year employees versus 12-month and then full-time versus nearly full-time. So all that information is there. Also included in the handout is the history of the deductible. I'll just highlight a few things in. Several years ago, we used to have a higher deductible, but then the district would kick into an HRA for us, and we eliminated that 4 or 5 years ago now. And then since then, through COVID, we made a point administratively, and the board agreed with us to try to keep our health insurance plan as stable as possible as we were going through. It ended up being good claims years with COVID, oddly. But also, we had the stipends on the salary side, and we were just trying to keep some things as stable. But the only changes we've made in the last 4 years has been what the IRS has mandated. So we really didn't have a choice. So last year, we might not even have had this meeting because the feds were setting that limit, and we just implemented it. So with the 24-25 school year, we are looking, budget-wise, we need some savings. So we looked at the best possible option to get there while trying to maintain a competitive health insurance plan. And I did have some survey information from Waukesha County Schools that we reviewed and tried to compare, and I think we're very competitive. It gets hard, though, because Connewauk has 3 health plans, and they're not all high-deductible health plans. Some districts have clinics, other districts don't have clinics. So it's really hard to get to an apples-to-apples comparison, but Kristen Morose, who's our benefits coordinator, and I sat down, and then Sharon in HR and we just kind of eyeballed it, and we think we're very competitive even with this potential change. And then I also included the different thresholds of savings. On the lower end of the page, if we move to a 1,600, 3,200, meaning a single family, 1,600, 3,200, that's what the IRS has mandated. So that's happening, barring some change, right? outside of this room. Then I just did kind of increments to give you scale. It doesn't have to be one of these two other ones. It doesn't have, well, it doesn't have to be any of the two later ones, but, and then the associated savings that comes with that, both on a percentage of premium basis and on a dollar basis. The one question I got today, but I should also go back, when you look at the rates up above, we have employees do a health risk assessment every year, which is blood sampling, kind of your baseline, high blood pressure, those types of things. And if you participate in that, you pay less towards your premium. And then a split wellness means if you have a spouse who's with the district or not, that's covered under our family plan. If one takes the HRA and one doesn't, that's your split. So that's kind of a mid-ground. And then we have single and family non-wellness, meaning they chose not to participate in the HRA at all. So that's, the wording's kind of unique, I guess, as I look back. And then we prorate by hours worked, with 40 being full-time, so. And then one other thing, as you look at the, this deductible conversation, I also added the clinic offerings, that most of them are rather new, that would help someone fend off the costs of an increase in the deductible. Probably the most impactful one, if I had to guess, would be the prescription kiosk that we added this past January with $2 prescription drugs for a list of about 120-ish drugs and longer prescriptions times in terms of how many pills you get, et cetera. We have e-visits, additional lab services have been added, extended in-person hours, including evenings, and then we lowered the required age for care from 6 down to 4. So all those things go into, I think, looking at this topic of conversation tonight. And then lastly, I asked our consultants, H&I, how many people hit our deductible? And they said just under 20%. So it's a lot lower than you think, but as Jim and I were talking earlier, we remember the days when we didn't go to the doctor hardly ever, and it is possible. So factor that in as well, but again, we're looking at the middle deductible as a recommendation, but it's really the board's call. If we stay with just the IRS, then we look elsewhere within the budget for savings. But this is one that we thought, since we haven't really moved the deductible a significant amount in several years, that one that we should bring forward to have this committee consider it. So I'm here, Kristen, if Kristen's here as well to answer questions. Kristen loves the limelight, so.
We'll start, Mr. Wad.
Thank you. Just for my benefit, and I see the note that this is going to be eliminated, so maybe it's not an important question, but
Oh, I should have mentioned that, yeah.
if someone could explain to me what split wellness and non-wellness means, what are those?
Split wellness is one, if you have a family plan and there's 2 adults, if one of them doesn't do the HRA, they're considered non-wellness. So you'd have one who did do it and one who didn't do the HRA screening. So they have a rate, they get 50% credit, I guess. And then non-wellness is people who just choose not to do the HRA event, which is held every October, every fall.
October and November.
Yeah, and we hold them, we try to make it as convenient as possible. We hold those at every school, I believe, just 20 of our schools. One for convenience, but also sub-coverage. You can't be running it all day. It just wouldn't, I don't think HR would appreciate that very much. So again, we try to make it as comfortable as possible and easy for people to take.
And just one more question if I could. So you had indicated that 20% hit the deductible. Is that the single person deductible? Is it the family deductible? Is it different depending on which deductible we're talking about?
For each plan, whether you're family or single, 20% of your family and 20% of your single are hitting.
Okay.
It might not break out perfectly like that.
But it's
probably-
in the same basic neighborhood?
Right.
Okay.
Right. And according to our consultants, and this is an old rule, 20% of your people cause 80% of your claims. It's not everyone utilizing $15,000 worth of healthcare that's driving your costs.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. That seems to be pretty consistent with industry standard, the 20%. I think especially as the high deductible plans become more popular, also gets a little bit harder to hit those. Is there any anticipated change to the premium?
This would result in our premiums still going up 5%.
Okay.
When we've historically budgeted for when I do that original budget projection in January, I make the assumption that health insurance will go up 5%, and if our renewal comes in above that, plan design brings it back down to that 5%, or more depending on, what our situation is.
So this is part of the plan redesign to keep the premium at the 5%?
Exactly.
My other question is, I lost track of it. Oh, we don't charge any surcharge for otherwise employed and benefited spouses.
Not at this time, but we have been talking with and H&I just changed their name to something
Acrisure.
Acrisure, literally just got the email. But we have had conversations about that. Every year we go through this process, and we've talked about networks, how wide, how skinny or how wide, the spousal surcharge, and there's several ways you could go about doing that. We've also had conversations about a deductible, and with the clinic, at what point do you need to provide a little more steerage in the deductible to get people to go to the clinic, which is a savings to them and us. So we have a whole list of topics that we review every year as part of our natural process.
Can I ask one more? Have you guys done any analysis on the projected savings from some of, this series of offerings over the last couple of years? I mean, obviously, it's still TBD with some of the prescription medications, but per insured member, do we have an idea about what we think that'll save?
I don't know on a per person basis, but I know it's saving money just in general having the clinic, and it's taking people longer to get to the deductible because we only charge $30 a visit when they go to the clinic. So that's why there's less people even meeting the deductible now, and if it's preventive, it is still zero. So that $30, every time they utilize the clinic, I think is keeping people below the deductible.
Yeah. I think these are great additions to the plan.
Yeah.
I think they're very resourceful.
I should also add one change that helped us be very stable the last few years was our change in the high-cost prescription drug program, which has literally saved us millions of dollars. And that was really almost an accounting paper transaction, not a change in coverage. So we have done other things besides the deductible in the last few years.
My last question is just, do we offer any buyout or incentive for those who don't opt into the plan?
We used to have the cash in lieu of benefit going back years. I don't know if that was right after Act 10, if that might have gone away. A lot of districts, most districts used to have it, and that hasn't been around in Waukesha for probably a decade. Well, I've been here 9 years, so at least that long.
I've seen it coming back in a couple other industries, so.
Yeah.
We did it because we researched our United Health. Maybe trust. That was an incentive.
Okay.
Yeah, we've actually talked about that whole spousal surcharge, incentivizing people to get coverage elsewhere. But it gets hard to cost, I think, because you have to anticipate what a decision's going to be. And everyone has a different health plan, and I almost think it's kind of a break even. Some years you'll win, some years you won't, but no, it's been a long time since that's been paid out. And actually, very few, I think there's one or two districts in Waukesha County that still offer it.
Just to back of the envelope, my estimate was that about a 2 to 3% surcharge would have the same effect as the increase in the deductible that was proposed. And I'm not expert here, but I guess it's just one of the many levers, right? There's so many variables. And I also want us to be competitive in the industry, and I think having some benchmarks, obviously everybody's doing things a little bit differently now, but that's just really important that we're not closing these budget gaps on backs of employees. But and I guess when it comes to those who are hitting their deductible, aside from unexpected emergency situations, I think those are typically either people who are dealing with chronic health issues or pretty serious things. So I want to be sensitive to that.
Yeah, that list of things that we have that we review, and there's new things every year too. I mean, over the next few years, at least half of those things will probably be implemented. I mean, everyone's healthcare is shifting.
I think some of the local things you guys have done with the plan are exceptional.
Yeah, Mrs. Voigt?
You mentioned that the split wellness premium tier is going to be eliminated for 24, 25. What was the reason for that change recommendation?
When I first thought of it, and Kristen and I were talking about it, is if we're truly of the belief that the HRA is a beneficial thing, we think most people should be able to, or people should be either required or not required to take it, and that to have this mid-ground doesn't, I don't know if the steerage was there to, again, if you think the HRA, and that's a debatable thing as well with people, we just think that it's important enough to not give them the option. And there is special cases that Kristen works through. I'll just give an example. If someone's going through chemotherapy, for example, and their doctor don't want them to come to a classroom or a gym full of people or whatever, we do make exceptions for unique situations that may, because with this many lives covered by our health plan, there's always several unique situations out there, so.
I think there's a lot of good questions. I think from an industry standpoint, not just within education, but this is the time of year that all companies are going through the review of their annual healthcare premiums. And, keeping in mind that the goal for most is to try to minimize the impact to the staff. But when you start to take a look at 24 and 25% increases in the costs that companies are absorbing, and the cost of healthcare is continuing to rise, and the services with that, looking at trends where, specifically to the district, where we've held back on passing on further increases to the staff, it's twofold. It's, we were able to do that, but we're in an environment where healthcare costs and premiums are rising. And some way, somehow, that has to be addressed. And, I talk a lot, there's a lot of different ways. I call it a shell game. One way to do that is to increase the employee premiums, which is an immediate impact that is felt per paycheck. Other ways are to do the deductible, where many employees aren't using that. And when you take a look at the benefits of the pieces that we're offering, number one, to encourage healthcare, right? When we talk through preventative services, the reason that we do that is for the fact to try to catch things before it becomes a heavy claim, and that is to the benefit of the employee. So I think there's a lot to be said. We also do see the creative ways where, to Dr. Piasek's point, where, absorbing the costs of a full family becomes a heavy burden. And if there is insurance that is offered through the spouse, how do they take that, and looking at the surcharge and other options? There's a multitude of ways to be really creative to deal with the rise and increasing costs so that we can manage the overall district financials, but also still remain competitive to the employee. And for me, taking a look at not only just the IRS recommendation, but just the thought of the deductibles, knowing what we're doing, that's the least barred that I see to the employees as to how many of them are going to actually have to do that. And the deductibles are low. Even with the increase, these are not what we see, when you're looking at the industry across the board, where families, if they're on the marketplace, are going through that, their deductibles are 10, 15, 20,000. And that's normal. So, taking a look at it and trying, how do you balance all of these pieces that we have to be responsible with our bottom line, but also making sure that we are supporting our employees and being competitive. These are hard conversations, and I think that from this standpoint, I don't see this as being a significant challenge to being able to remain competitive, as well as support what we need to do with our internal financials.
Another question. Did you?
No. Oh,
I thought I saw it.
Any other questions?
So the federal piece is not a
Negotiable.
recommendation, that's
It's
a
required.
requirement. So we're going to end up seeing, a little less than a 10% increase just by default. So it's basically 20% more for 20% of our employees.
It is. Mr. Wad?
Yeah, Darren, can you refresh my memory as to the increase in premiums for 23, 24? Was there one?
No.
We were able to hold them.
When was the last time we raised premiums?
They've been the same for 21, 22, 22,
And 4
23,
years.
23, 24.
It was right before I got on the board.
So we would be looking at both a premium increase and a deductible increase
Yeah.
simultaneously. Do we know roughly what a 5% increase is going to translate into for either a single or a family plan?
$85 a month for a family. Is that right, Darren? Sorry.
Currently, a single wellness, they pay $101 a month, and it would go to 105,
Their share.
their share.
Gotcha.
And the family is 228, and it would go to 240, 239.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's just 12% of that. And then what about the share percent? Has that been looked at?
That has not changed since, I'm assuming right after Act 10. And we thought about that, but in that case, everyone's getting impact, There's no perfect solution, otherwise we'd be doing it, right?
I don't think, in fairness, I don't think that these recommendations are unfounded and is super significant into the standpoint on taking a look at what these are. And for some, they may disagree. We're taking a look at, increases across the board where others are seeing hundreds of dollars a month, and not only premiums go up, but also on the cost of their deductibles, and trying to maintain with where we're at. I don't think these are unreasonable.
I'm curious what Mr. McCaffrey thinks. You've been here for a while and through a number of cycles.
I guess what's the recommendation from the administration, possible action?
Get your mic.
Yeah, we're recommending the move to the increase for single deductible $300 and family deductible $600. 1/3 of that's being mandated, so
Right.
however you want to look at that. But that's the total.
Okay. Well, I don't think any of it is really unreasonable. My insurance is through Oconomowoc, and we are in the high deductible plan. And my wife's been there well, we haven't been at a high deductible. My wife's been there 24 years, and we've made it deductible 1 year. So, I don't think any of this is unreasonable, the deductible options that we have here. I mean, I find it comical, the IRS mandates what we set a deductible at. But I mean, I don't find any of these deductible options unreasonable, the 2,000, 4,000, I mean, that's gonna be a third of what I pay. Yeah. And Kettle Moraine has a high deductible too. I mean, these are still low deductibles in this area. When I say Kettle Moraine's high deductible plan is 10,000. I have family members that are on it, so I don't have a problem with any of these. I think we're low right now with our deductible compared to a lot of districts in the area that I'm familiar with. I think we've done a really good job keeping our deductibles low and our increases low. I think that the business office has done a spectacular job in that, so, I mean, eventually we're gonna have to increase it a little bit more.
I do think the savings from some of these new implementations offset anything that would happen to the premiums. I mean, it's a small amount, so I think those that are using the benefits, I think, are going to see that.
So being where we are, we don't have much. We need to make a decision and move. Like I said, there's a multitude of ways that you could move the shells in different categories and try to spend this. But I think from where we're at, this is to some degree the path of least resistance.
So
We'd be looking for
Your
a
meeting.
motion or a recommendation, yeah, further discussion. All right, I would put it forward that I move to recommend the increase to the deductible for the health insurance plan for the 2024-2025 years as presented by administration.
May I just ask a clarification? Are we looking for approval of the entire plan proposal or just the deductible change?
The wellness, the split wellness and the deductible change. Everything else through the clinic's already been approved by the board, so that's functioning right now. We did that contract amendment a few months ago now.
Yeah.
So the movement in total premium is included in what we're,
Yeah, and we won't know that total premium until May,
Yeah.
because we're self-funded, so it's all based on our claims.
enrollment
so-
and claims.
And keep in mind, our claims don't run on our fiscal year, they run on the school year, so September 1 is our renewal, so we have history and we have trends and all of that, but in terms of actual months of data, it's still coming in.
Mr. Wad?
Yeah, I'm wondering, do we have any idea how many people currently opt out through split wellness in the HRA? Do we?
There's 15 on the split wellness out of 968.
15.
And last year was 8, or, yes, last
Yeah.
year was 8. We're talking about next year.
So just so I'm clear, that's a situation where the employee may do the HRA, but
David,
The
can I interrupt
Yeah,
you for a second?
sorry.
Because Carrie made a motion.
that's,
So I'm just going to second it to put it in play so that we can discuss.
okay.
Thanks. Go ahead, sorry. I just didn't want to lose track of it.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that I understand split wellness properly. So that's where the spouse, a spouse chooses not to take the,
Or
Take
vice
this
versa,
out.
or the employee.
Or the-
chooses.
either the employee or the spouse, one or the other opts
Exactly.
out of the HRA, okay.
Generally, it's the spouse,
Yeah.
but we have had an employee not do it and the spouse show up.
Okay.
Mrs. Voigt?
Could I ask for the clarification of which is the actual recommendation, the 2,000 and 4,000 as a deductible, or, you know, because
It's the middle one.
the middle one
Yep.
is what you're proposing, okay.
And as a side note, if one of those split wellness people, if they were to reach out that they have a medical emergency or they can't do the HRA and provide a doctor's note, we would exempt them and move them to the wellness, not keep them on a split. So we do work with the families to get them on that wellness plan if there is something holding them back. We also allow them to go to the clinic to do it if they want more privacy rather than the school location. So those are the accommodations Darren said we'll make for people if, we just need to know about it so that we can make sure the clinic is aware that we're sending people there outside of our normal HRA hours.
Is there any other discussion? All right, we go to a vote. Tanya, do you want to take, oh, no, it's
You
just.
don't need a roll call.
All right, so all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
I,
All opposed? It passes 5-0. All right, moving into our discussion and information items for the night. The first topic is the Rose Glen Memorial Project. Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah,
It shouldn't have been.
Melissa Nikolic and Kate Halliburton are here to talk about a project they'd like to do out at Rose Glen related to a staff member who passed away recently. And then as I put in the executive summary, this is a new board policy, so we're defining what the procedure for these types of requests are. And us at Cabinet talked about it, and we thought, well, maybe F&F just signing off by consensus saying, go ahead would be fine, and it wouldn't take full board approval. But that's really for you to decide as a board. It's your policy, so we're willing to do whatever. But so as you're listening to their presentation, and all the handouts are in board docs for you, just be thinking about other scenarios, other gifts, and if this is the right place to be asking this question or not. So I'll turn it over to the Rose Glen staff.
Hi, Melissa Nikolic, Principal of Rose Glen.
I'm Kate Halliburton. I work at Rose Glen, but I'm also a parent in the district and a good friend of Karen Simonson's.
And so we appreciate your time tonight to just hear us out about Karen Simonson, who passed away last spring and was just an amazing educator, friend, community member. And so before the new policy was passed, we had some plans to maybe update, beautify a part of our property on Rose Glen that could use it. And so, but then we also just wanted to make sure that we would be okay to do that, or if we should do that or not. So you can see in your handout, we just want to look at a little bit of a space in the back of our building that could use a little bit of updating and just be able to embed a little bit of Karen and who she was. She loved flowers, she loved outdoors, and perhaps includes a little bit of a Disney quote of her family's choosing just to put out there. But we just want to make sure we're doing it within the parameters of what recognizing and moving forward.
We know the policy is new, and we're the first people to try it out. So we don't like to use the term guinea pig, but we get it. And I would rather, a lot of times I like the whole philosophy of, ask for forgiveness instead of permission. But for this one, it's way too important to us, and we really want to make sure that everything is okay to do. We were hoping to, keep the family involved as well. We didn't want to get them too excited because we knew this policy might stand in the way of a couple things. So we just wanted to make sure that everybody was on board with it. I know we We spoke with Dr. Stiebert and with Mr. Clark about it. Mainly just the naming of things is probably the big part of the policy, that you don't want people's names on things. And we respect that and understand that, but we want to have it so that when people are out there, they will remember Karen and celebrate all that she did for our building. She was in our building for majority of her time with the district. I think I looked it up. I did. I have it on there. February of 1999, she started in the district. She worked in multiple schools. You were with her at Meadowbrook.
Meadowbrook,
Yep.
Butler, Randall, so she's, and
been-
Rose Glen,
and
Summit
Rose
View,
Glen.
so.
Yep, she's, and always in special ed. She loved it in special ed. And her kids are part of this community. She has, her children are at Waukesha West. So her husband used to be at Kettle Moraine, so he used to be an educator as well. So we understand about the naming, we're okay with that. We just want to make sure that we can put some little personal touches on there that were very much Karen, that we will know about without having her name painted on the side of the building or on a plaque.
Yeah.
Dr. Piasek?
Thank you. I think, the spirit of the policy was exactly probably what was intended to have these conversations, right? And this is very much, it's important closure and celebration for the local school communities. So while we kind of practice how to apply the policy, there are some things I think we could do to the committee bylaw that would allow FNF to make that decision, the way this is written, that could be delegated to committee responsibility, so it doesn't have to become, unfortunate, parading people around to different committees, which is not the intent. And I think what you're proposing, in my opinion, is something that's very relevant to someone who is important to your community, and it just seems to make sense if the kids can be involved, and it's not an overwhelming thing, like you mentioned. But even if it were, I think that's the kind of thing that we want to consider, because these are difficult things and things that you want to give people space to remember. So whether that's a bench or a garden or a tree or whatever it is, I think the spirit of this was more so that people aren't just running around naming things.
Yes,
And that also we're kind of really taking into consideration those unfortunate losses that, may cause some other behaviors that we don't want. So I think we just need to kind of contemplate how we can apply this in a gracious way so that it doesn't feel like you're asking for forgiveness, right?
I think for me, obviously it's very heartfelt and touching, but the part that really I'm engaged about is the support and the children involvement. So much of what we see within the community is the hands-on and the engaging and being part of something that they can contribute to as well as maintain. And I think for me, the maintain part is the part that I just want to make sure that is continued, because there's obviously going to be a tremendous amount of love that's pushed through with the creation, a lot of strong emotions that will come with that as well. But there's the gift that keeps giving, and to share that journey with kids that are coming up through the years, to keep that. I just want to make sure that stays part of the plan. Elementary school students are also creative and nosy and want to run around and be children.
Yes.
How dare they?
Right, so, building something that also reflects the art of play in there too for them, so that it's something that is available to them to be part of. I just think it's great.
Thank you.
And Karen worked with all age levels in our building, so it was just important to make sure that we included everybody. And even though a lot of her students are probably not there, well, she's got a couple left,
couple
but
left, yeah.
it's still a way to keep everybody involved and to maintain it, because, it needs to be maintained. And it's our responsibility to do that. So we're just going to push that on to the children.
Yeah,
It's healthy.
yes.
Mrs. Voigt?
I think it's a beautiful plan. And like to have the plaque with a Disney quote, selected by her family, is not really a naming of that space per se, but just a very positive statement of one of her loves, as being demonstrated within the area.
Thank you.
So this is a discussion item.
We were thinking just by consensus, unless there was some reason not to proceed, that we would just, this conversation would be enough to move ahead. Jim and I talked about, we didn't really feel like there had to be an official vote but that's, again, this is the first go-around.
My personal opinion is, and this is nothing to do with the proposal that's in front of us, but the way that we have put this to policy, I don't think I agree with you. So I think we either need to have future discussion about changing this or changing the authority delegated to certain committees or to certain buildings, but going back to buildings kind of defeats the purpose of creating the policy in the first place. So again, I don't want to get wrapped up in that here, but I don't know that the way the policy is written and approved, we have appropriately done that.
Sure.
But it has nothing to do with the proposal.
No,
I think this is a good
it's a dual conversation.
learning opportunity, yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Mr. Rudd?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I want to start by saying this looks like a beautiful memorial to an individual who was obviously a very loved and important member of the Rose Glen community and probably touched the lives of hundreds, if not thousands of people in her time. And I want to be clear that in the vacuum, in the absence of a policy, I think it would be wonderful and I'd be fully supportive. Having said that though, and having been a part of this committee that has approved this policy recently, and as you acknowledge, this being the first time that this has come before, or a recommendation like this has come before this committee and could potentially go before the board, I just want to make sure that we're very careful in the consideration of this, because it will set a precedent for how we handle future proposals. And the policy is fairly clear in that generally we are not to support permanent memorials. Now, that doesn't mean that we have, I mean, we certainly can go back and revisit the policy and decide if we want to be perhaps a little bit more clear with what we really intend. And for that reason, I'm not sure that I'm ready tonight to make a decision one way or another. I think I'd like for us to talk a little bit as a committee about whether or not perhaps this policy needs some amendment, or to Dr. Piasek's point, perhaps some guidance on how these decisions are made. I'm very uncomfortable with the idea that these become debated at a public meeting or at the board level. So I'm wondering if maybe we can take some time to understand what it is that this policy specifically means, how it relates to this particular proposal, and whether or not we may want to consider some language change to the policy before we move forward with this proposal. So I think my preference would be that we use this as a discussion item for tonight, an opportunity to talk some more about it, and then perhaps review the policy before considering this proposal for a final approval.
Can I just ask a question? So historically so this one's a little bit different, which I think is maybe why But when it comes to facilities and whatnot, and we're putting in playgrounds, or we're putting in or updating landscaping, we don't ask for permission or in this. And so like, and I'm not, this is not going back to the ask for forgiveness later, but I am tapping on that a little bit because in theory, some of what is done is an area that needs to be re-landscaped.
Right, yeah.
So one way or another, that is going to have to be done. And I am absolutely intrigued with having the community and the kids partake in something that is taking something that's in need of support and building it up. So I'm struggling a little bit with determining where the policy ends versus where some of this would be, with exception, I think where we're pulling in the Disney quote that gives that, right? So I'm all right with Mr. Watt if we want to take this as a discussion item, and put it back up. I'm still challenged a little bit as to whether or not the work, I mean, can we move forward with landscaping to put some love in that without memorializing the Disney quote in there before that? Dr. Piasek?
I'm going to follow up on what both of you said, because maybe I'm coming up with an idea here, but I mean, before we had this particular piece in the policy, I'm aware of a number of very heartfelt things that have happened at different buildings, trees, benches, stones, things like that. Do we feel like we had a problem? I think this is about just having some
Yeah,
process, right?
Yeah, it was a Neola policy update that came through. So I'm guessing somewhere else, someone had challenges with it. I don't think here in Waukesha we did. When we talked earlier today, we thought, there is some value in certain portions of the policy, but when we get into a situation like this, perhaps that third paragraph is something we could tweak futuristically and/or some kind of a, administrative guideline too that would help.
Because the other thing that comes to mind, and depending on what you all were thinking, like, there's just some beautiful stones that can have plaques affixed to them, and the off chance that there was, a water main under the garden, or something that had to be modified. I think that's really what we're getting at, right? I know there's a memorial tree at Whittier, and those are sometimes things that make it really difficult for us to work around some things, and I'm not getting that sense here. Like, this is something that is so permanent that we couldn't work through it. I think the purpose is to have that memory and to have a space that's really a part of
Right,
celebration.
and that it just beautifies
Yeah.
the whole area, so that's where I think we struggled a little bit too. Ultimately, our goal is for us to be able to honor her, but also at the same time, beautify a part of our building. Gives us a good purpose and reason, and something that we know that she would have,
Yeah.
wanted to be a part of anyways too. So I agree with that, with the beautification part. And then if there's maybe that element of the Disney piece or a plaque or a commemorative stone that we want to, if we could just at least be able to maybe begin to move forward with what we might want that to look like in general, and then add any specific individual elements to it, that we could do that. That could be phase 2 if we wanted. Or we can just wait totally. We get it. We were reading through it. I know they were reading through it like, okay, there has to be a way we can make this work somehow, so.
Well, and my thought, and my opinion is the way that the policy is written is exactly what we're doing, right? We can bring it to the board and have an approval to carry on. And then if we as a board want to choose to make modifications either to the policy or who or what we delegate the authority to on behalf of the board, we have that within our power. So I'm just not sure that we want to delay something that's pretty simple
That was
because
our
of
goal.
our own policy language.
Well, and
But
we're
it's in the
coming up on
policy.
the anniversary of her passing at the end of May.
Yeah.
Not to put a ton of pressure on you, but we were hoping to deliver some really good news to her family. I did speak to her husband and her children last night. If any of you read the Freeman, it was in the Freeman last night. Over the weekend, an article was posted about this proposal, which was super surprising to Melissa and I when we saw that. But we still hadn't spoken to the family yet. So I did speak to Dan Simonson and his two children about it, and they're very excited about it too. They respect the policy. It does not say no. That was why we did all of this, is because your policy doesn't say no. It just says, no, we just want to hear what you want to do, and we want to give you hopefully a yes. But if it's a no, maybe we can just adjust what you want to do. I think when I emailed Mr. Borowski about it, I was kind of like, because our daughters are very good friends, and I just said, what would you like to see? What would the board love to see if I could get this at least moving in the right direction, just so we can deliver some good news to not just her family, but to our community at Rose Glen as well, because she was important to us
Made
there.
a very positive impact.
Yeah.
So a lot of people.
So we could proceed with improving the landscaping around Rose Glen.
I agree. I agree. I think this is, I think the formality of this is a little too formal in what we're trying to do. We're not erecting a statue of her, although.
We took that out of there.
That was in the first proposal. We're going to save that for her.
It's already in.
I just think there's a lot of value into this that I think we should move forward. And then as a board and committee, we can talk about how to refine the policy to adjust it, because I still struggle with what we're approving. I think this is the landscaping.
I mean, it's landscaping, but I mean, the only thing that really in the policy needs to be approved is the plaque.
Yes, that's what
Yeah.
we,
And we have time.
And we have time
We have
for
time.
that. But I mean, obviously you'd have to come up with a quote.
There's a,
Dr. Piasek?
I don't think it has to be approved unless it's permanent.
Well, it's worded oddly,
It's not stuck to the embedded
It's not gonna
in
be
the
that-
wall or,
but it, I mean,
might
it
be
says generally the
freestanding in the area.
yeah.
board, I mean, I guess the definition would be what's a permanent memorial? There's really no such thing as a permanent memorial. We change the name of schools all the time. We
So-
can change the name of Les Paul and it's no longer a permanent memorial. You know what I mean? I mean, that's what is oddly worded. I mean, what's a permanent?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a
Washington
difference
Monument?
between a wall and a bench.
For sure, you could
Right.
attach it to the bench and,
Yeah.
or stick it in the, you know, have it on a pike and stick it into the ground, or a rock, have it engraved on a rock. I mean, I guess the only thing that would be, what's the quote? That would be the only thing that,
so what I'm hearing is that we are excited to see
get some new landscape.
your landscaping effort in dedication to somebody very special to our community.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. We appreciate the time. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion about
I don't
whether
think
this
there's any
is
further
permanent or
discussion
not?
about
No,
the
I
landscaping.
think,
That's building and grounds, which would be Darren. Right?
Yeah,
You're running building and grounds.
yeah.
Have control over landscaping at the individual schools. Sounds like an administrative task to me.
I think we can get that done.
Yeah.
And then maybe just before we have any further discussion of the Disney quote or the plaque, we can do some work on the policy and/or bring that back to the committee for your consideration.
Agree.
Okay.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing what you guys do.
Thank you very much.
On
Thank-
behalf of our whole school community, thank you. We really appreciate that support.
it's beyond appropriate.
All right.
Wait, that didn't come out right. It's very appropriate.
All right, our next discussion and information item is the North High School Drainage Project.
Yeah,
This is less exciting.
Oh, we're going to close strong with the audit report. Christina puts on a heck of a show.
I'm fascinated by
The
that.
drainage project is why we don't have permanent memorials.
As we've talked about previously, we have been talking about this project for, I don't know, 6, 8, I forgot when we started. I want to say it was fall. As we were talking about Phase 3 of our capital improvement plan last year, the city, just by coincidence, was talking about this project at North High School, and at some point our paths crossed, and we decided that, let's start talking about what this could be, because I think everyone involved saw some real potential going forward for for a real change at North High School, but I remember the first meeting I said, I'd like to see that ditch filled in, and jaws dropped and things like that. But once we really started working through it, and I should add that the leadership at North High School has been involved in these conversations. Tom couldn't be here tonight, but I did share the PowerPoint with him, so he's aware of that. But so we're going to do a joint presentation of what this project could be. Not everything's planned out to the T. We're looking, the committee's agenda is to go into closed session on this topic as well, because there's some financial parts of this thing that we're working through and some negotiations. But we thought we should share this. And then I plan to go out to North High School, because the last time I talked at their booster club about Phase 3 improvements, because we had talked about the softball diamond, for example, and other improvements. But once this came up, it just froze everything until you knew what the drainage was and what the fields would end up with looking like. So I was thinking I would go back out with this information and just let them know that we're still looking at it, and we're looking at something that could be very interesting for North. So I'll lead off, and then I'll turn it over to the people from DPW to walk us through the more technical things. I've asked them to correct all my wording. I don't know if the ditch is technically a ditch or if it's a channel. Channel. But I think we have an interesting project in the making here to bring forward to the board at some point for final approval. I am in the process of trying to share my screen. Just one second. Oh, got it, okay. So as I mentioned before, why is this all white? Come on. I'm on a roll of technology in this room lately. I'll just go back to the PowerPoint. There we go. As I mentioned before, last summer when we were planning, the city was planning alongside with us. And then in fall, we got together and started throwing around ideas. But that caused us to postpone some of the work that we had hoped to do at North High School. And we did have conversations with the school community out there about that and the rationale. And I actually shared at that time just aerial view of what the channel is, but we had no idea we would end up where we are today. So again, we've been meeting for several months about different ideas and coming up with some shared goals and objectives. And tonight we're here to present the outcome of all these conversations. So this is, I call it a heat map. I don't know if that's the technical term, but because it's dealing with water. But it shows what happens when you have a 1% chance storm and where the water accumulates around North's campus. And we've joked that if North was buried 6 inches lower, it would be underwater on a regular basis, because it is surrounded by, or the potential of, standing water. And if you're familiar with their fields at all, they're damp. Last summer was an incredibly dry summer, and I can tell you the outfield for the softball outfield, just as an example, was as green as Ireland every day of the summer, and we were mowing twice a week. Everything else was brown in the entire city. But so this was the thing we were trying to improve and move forward. And I think Callie will be going through the before and after and the impact that this project would have on this current situation at North. So our objectives, from my view, and as Kyle and I were working with them, is to assist DPW in improving stormwater management needs in that section of the city around North High School. And with North High School being a necessary link of the improvements that DPW has already done on Summit View and on Michigan, and they'll go through that and how we're the key to making that project come to some level of completion. And then provide space for a detention pond to help control the flow of water from North High School to the southwest, meaning down Michigan and out. We also want to improve access for emergency responders to the softball field area on the backside of the main grandstand. Right now, the ditch is open to the point where, and the soil is so soft that you really can't get vehicles to that area of the fields. Just improve drainage in general for the North High School fields, and then fill in the north-south portion, the existing ditch, and create more flexible, uniform, and easier-to-use athletic fields. And we'll have a rendering of what that might look like as well. And I'll turn it over to, are you the spokesman?
Yes,
Kelly?
I
All right.
am.
So I'll turn it over to Kelly to go through the next few slides.
So, some background. In 2011, after some historic flooding, the city of Waukesha hired some consultants to complete a study that would analyze and model all of the stormwater flooding throughout the city. This study was completed in 2014, and it divided the city into 10 different areas, and it outlined potential improvements and projects in each area that would help to reduce flooding. So the area that North High School is in and that this project is in is known as Area 7. So there have already been several projects completed in Area 7, like Darren mentioned. In 2019, Summit Avenue was reconstructed. It was time to reconstruct from a roadway perspective. So while we were there and the road was torn up, we increased the size of the storm sewers to connect that piece of the puzzle. And then downstream, so south of North High School, in 2022, we had a standalone flood mitigation project, which included upsizing culverts under Michigan Avenue, University Drive, Madison Street, and Comanche Lane, as well as increasing the size of the ditch in between all of those upsized culverts. So this project that we're talking about today is really the connecting link. It's going to be the last project in Area 7, and it will help connect all of those pieces and hopefully improve the flooding in that area. So currently, the North High School site is completely bisected by this drainage ditch. Outlined here in blue is the existing ditch. We do have a 20-foot easement granted to the city over that ditch for maintenance. As Darren mentioned, the high school site does experience quite a lot of flooding. In part, it's the lowest spot in this entire area, so we can't really change that as much. But the goal of this project is to reduce flooding in all of Area 7 by increasing the capacity of the sewers and then the ditch as well. So starting on the north side of the site, the first step is to increase the capacity of the storm sewers. So we looked at two alternatives to do this. The first is to lay new large-sized storm sewer in Green Meadow Drive. And then the second alternative, which is highlighted in green, we're calling it the grandstand route, is to install that new storm sewer behind the football field grandstands in between those residential homes before turning west and discharging into that ditch. If we were to use the Green Meadow route, we would also be required to completely replace and relay all of the sanitary sewer in Green Meadow Drive, as well as the water laterals, simply because the storm sewer that we need is so large, it just doesn't fit with the current configuration. So by using the grandstand route, not only would we be saving taxpayer dollars by having to replace completely functional utilities in the road, it would have a shorter construction time, and it would have less impacts to all the residents of the area because we wouldn't have to close that road, which North High School does use for access as well off of Sherrill.
And there's already an easement behind those bleachers.
Correct. So we do have a sanitary sewer easement behind those bleachers. So if we were to move forward with this project, we would additionally need a drainage or storm sewer easement.
I just have a quick question. So the easement that's going to go behind the football field is going to be wider than what is currently there. And right now, there's a very, from my understanding, narrow sidewalk. So how are we getting people from point A to point B over to the field, right? So they're coming from the high school to the field.
Are you talking to the south there of the field?
You're referring to the north-south or the east-west section are you referring to?
Right, up, down, it's.
Up, down, north-south, okay, that's fine, that's fine.
Carrie, you mean just during construction or?
Yes.
Just access to the,
access to the field. Look,
So-
so we have all these athletes that are going to,
Yep, so we are planning to phase construction, working with the school district to hopefully mitigate any of those impacts, but we could also talk about temporary crossings. But we could specifically phase construction in that area to not impact the
Yeah,
football stadium.
we have a rough timeline that we'll share in a few slides that kind of,
I think about marching band and
Yeah.
all of, okay, thank you.
Yeah. So when we met with the school district a while ago, several months, they brought up two issues. One was the emergency access. The existing ditch and the football field fencing are too close, so emergency vehicles like ambulances just simply can't make it to that softball field there. And then another issue is that the area highlighted in the green oval there is consistently holding water, even during dry periods. So we plan to address both of these issues during the project. We're going to, in the green rectangle there, extend piping, so about 30 feet or so. The area that is now ditch will soon be piped, if this project continues, will be piped and covered so that emergency vehicles would have that additional room for access to the softball fields. And then we will also be grading the softball outlot area to, if it does have water in the areas, it will be able to drain correctly into the ditch rather than to be held there. Yeah.
Just a quick question on the ditch or channel to the south of that softball field. So, I know you've talked about extending to provide EMS. Would it extend, like, the length of that fence of the, or part way? Where does
No,
that,
so
where does
right-
the ditch begin and?
Sure. So if you see, the thick blue is where the ditch currently is, and then the thin blue is where the pipe currently is. So that's kind of that delineation there. We would only be extending it about 30 feet, just for the access for the vehicles.
Is that the green box?
About, yeah. It's not to scale, but.
Okay, but
yes.
roughly.
It's about.
Yeah.
Roughly, okay. All right, thank you.
So as we move west, we start to get into the channel. So the next key piece of this project from a flood mitigation standpoint is to increase the capacity of that ditch. We could increase capacity in the ditch's current location, but it would be a great improvement to the school district site if we were able to move the ditch to the west. It would really allow them to fully utilize all of their site that's currently bisected. So in the blue there is the proposed ditch location, and then the red section is what we would be filling in and turning to turf grass. When we originally were conceptually looking at this project, relocating the ditch was not something we had considered, mostly because that blue section in the bottom right, that is the current location for the Michigan culvert crossing. So the ditch needs to be able to make that alignment to cross Michigan and continue on its way. So the only way we are really able to make that connection is by turning the current auxiliary parking lot area into a stormwater detention facility or pond. And that really helps us benefit the high school by being able to relocate that ditch. It is also a benefit to the city because prior to the pond being part of the discussion, we were not able to increase the capacity of the ditch the full amount that we wanted to without causing flooding downstream on Michigan Avenue. But with this pond in place, it'll be able to handle the additional flow, and we can increase the size of the ditch to reduce that flooding without causing downstream problems on Michigan Avenue. So we're planning for this pond to be a dry basin. It will fill up and hold water during wet weather events, though. We're anticipating it, design isn't finalized, so all of this is subject to change, but anticipating it to be about 6 feet deep with slopes between 4 to 1 and 6 to 1. And around the pond, as well as the ditch, we are going to be installing a 6-foot fence because the school district really emphasized that safety is a major concern with this project. Yeah.
Do we have any other retainment ponds like this in the city that I
Yes,
may have driven by or,
that you could have driven by. I think,
well, I'm just wondering,
Even the one on the corner.
could,
yeah.
Just down the road, on the corner of Michigan and University is a large pond right there that actually Callie was part of that project that she
is
mentioned
that
in
on the south side of
2022.
Michigan?
Yeah,
Yeah.
right on the corner.
Okay.
That is a wet pond, so it will have water in it year-round. Other dry detention facilities, what's the park just east on Summit?
I'm trying to think of where you're thinking. We don't have too many dry ponds. The reason why we don't usually use dry ponds, for the most part, is they do not provide water quality that we generally need to have for different DNR requirements. And so generally, you see wet ponds, but wet ponds have their own set of issues, obviously. And one thing we're trying to do here is balance a little bit of what some of the school district needs were. As much as we probably wouldn't mind having a wet pond here, the size of it probably wouldn't gain us a whole lot from a city standpoint, from a water quality standpoint. And with the district's view of, we'd rather not see a wet pond on a high school site, that really wasn't a big deal for us to go and say, yeah, this dry pond would be fine.
Do we typically on the wet ponds, do we typically fence them? Do we have safety issues at other locations? I mean, obviously, the proximity to a school increases that, right? But I'm just wondering if there are any safety issues and how those are mitigated.
Sure.
as well.
So any ponds that we're putting in place today have what's known as a safety shelf. It's specifically an area of the pond that's less steep, so if someone was to fall in, it wouldn't instantly be, feet deep in water. But the pond just south of this one does not have any fencing. Over the culvert crossings, there is some split rail fence where we get really close to the sidewalks. But no, for the most part, none of our city ponds or detention facilities have fencing.
Mr. McCaffrey?
What's the water table? I mean, a wet pond, you're gonna dig down 6 feet here, it's gonna be a wet pond. There's gonna be water in it. I mean, the water table, it's a kettle.
What you generally do with a pond, if you want to keep it dry, is you actually put a clear liner in it, so it separates the groundwater from the actual pond. So this would, if we wanted to make this a dry pond and keep it a dry pond, then we would use a clay liner, and usually that's a 2-foot wide section of clay. So it's a very, it
So you're gonna line
solidifies it and makes it so that
Right.
you don't have migration, correct?
Okay, so, and I'm not a hydrologist, so bear with me. A retention pond is supposed to bleed groundwater back into the aquifer, correct? I mean, that is one way that the groundwater, is dissipated from the pond. And the one I'm thinking of, and I don't really know, but the most infamous pond in the city of Waukesha is the one on College.
Yes.
And that's a huge one, and that is fenced in, because we have tons of college kids that go through that every day. So, what's gonna happen to the water and I guess if you go to that heat map, I have a question on the heat map.
Just to step back real quick to answer your first question, I think what you're thinking about, if things that get water back into the ground, would be an infiltration basin, and
Okay.
specifically to recharge groundwater.
Right.
That's not what we're obviously trying to do here. There's other areas where that is requirement of like new development and things of that
Yes.
nature. And in this case, we wouldn't be recharging groundwater because we would have the clay liner, which would prevent, obviously, it from being an infiltration.
Okay, that leads to my other question. What happens to the water in the pond? Because if the field is wet, the pond's gonna fill up. Where are we putting that water? Because
So-
if the water is gonna have to leave the pond, so I work out in Lake Country and I can watch those lakes rise and fall and they just did, they lost 30 feet of beach on Genesee Lake. So when we get those kind of rain, where is that water gonna go that's in the pond to account for the 2 inches of rain that just fell? If it's not going to bleed out into the surrounding,
Sure, so it will
Groundwater.
head through the culvert south of Michigan.
Okay.
It'll all be drained that way.
Okay.
And there's a series of channels and ditches that lead to the wetlands out west of the bypass.
oh, they go under the bypass? Okay. And-
That's where all of this water heads, and that's,
okay, and that's this right here?
That would be a little
Yep.
bit to your, yes.
Yep, you're in the right area, yep. It keeps going then off, it goes into the pond that was mentioned earlier, heads off.
And then it goes under University,
Yep.
and then
Okay.
into Brookshire Lake, which is that large water facility.
Yep.
And then south to Madison, and then west under Comanche, and then another series of ditches, and then under Les Paul, and into the wetland.
Under 318.
On the corner of Madison and,
If you go down,
bypass.
if you're just south of Madison, you go way down
Yep.
that hill and come back up,
Yep.
that's where this
that's where it
process
goes. That's
eventually.
where all
yep.
this water is gonna go.
All this water eventually gets there, correct.
Okay, do you have to increase the size of the pipe from the retention pond to the wetlands? Is that part of the project as well? or
So
is
that was the 2022 improvements we made.
Oh, so that's already been done.
Started there, correct.
Gotcha, okay.
Yeah, this project falls between
Yes.
Summit and the other one, so in a
Excellent.
sense, we have the two pieces on either end, and we don't have the piece in the middle,
Right,
which is
okay.
where the high school sits.
Excellent. I appreciate your description because I know exactly what you're talking about. So, the sanitary sewer easement, which is behind the stands, there's a sanitary sewer there right now. What does that service?
It serves the entire area that comes off of Summit. It comes down, it's a 24-inch diameter.
Okay.
So it's relatively large. It takes our whole area from the, kind of the northwest of this section.
Yep.
Up by University, all that area there comes down. And so, yeah, it's actually tucked more to the, it's just inside the east property line is where that
Okay.
sanitary, and the idea would be to put this one obviously right next to it.
Right.
And get them as tight as they can
Okay.
to stay as far to the east as we possibly can
Okay.
to minimize any impacts to, obviously, the district property.
And that sanitary sewer used to go to the pumping station that was on Michigan, but now is to gravity
Correct.
feed all the
Yep.
way to the thing.
Correct.
Okay, that's all the questions I have right now.
Dr. Piasek.
I have a question just while we're looking at some of these pictures on the new channel,
Okay.
which looks like it's going to carry a whole lot more water out than the current channel. What are you anticipating in terms of depth, and are you planning to put like erosion control, riprap or something in there, or have you considered something else?
Sure, so riprap is definitely an option for erosion control. We would probably use it on areas like the bends, and any areas like highly susceptible to erosion. On most of our flood mitigation projects in the past 5 or so years, we've used, we call it a slope stabilizing seed mix. So it'd be a collection of native grasses and flowering plants, but they're specifically designed to help hold soil in place.
And you even used, I think in your most recent project, you used a geogrid to reinforce that area
Correct.
underneath it so that when plants go through it, then you're not just tearing them right back out again. So the idea, riprap is very expensive to put in, and it's relatively unsightly, and it's great for engineers who have to put a lot of riprap in, but it's really not very native.
Yeah, I'm actually glad to hear that, because it's, obviously we don't want that. We don't want it where there's going to be people, for sure. I was curious about the mats. I don't know how far they've come along, but it sounds like you've got a combination of those things that will make it safe and not too unsightly. And
We hope, yeah.
will there be any protection to the channel itself, fence or otherwise, or will that just remain open?
Yeah, so specifically on the school district side of the property, we were planning on including the fence around that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, around not only the pond, but also along the entire, length of the ditch. And then that's one thing when the district was talking to us earlier about it, when we were leaving, when we had the original, if you want to say, the current ditch in the middle, and there's no fence on there right now. We go ahead and we clear cut, we open that up. As soon as you open it up, oh, hello, look, we have this ditch we can all hang out in, right, or whatever. So then the question came up, well, now you fence it on both sides. Well, this goes right down the middle. I mean, when we slide it off to the side, now you have a fence on one side, maybe both, but you definitely on one side, it tucks away off. It changes the dynamic.
It significantly changes that whole side of our facility, which is underutilized because of the flooding.
Absolutely.
I think this is where we left off on the
Yeah.
slide.
That sounds
Yep.
great. So.
Good questions, though. These are good questions, yeah.
Absolutely. So this shows the existing versus proposed conditions. So the existing is what Darren showed earlier. That's what it currently looks like during this 1% chance storm. The proposed conditions would be after all of these changes are made that we're talking about now, that's the result of the flooding. So really what we're trying to get rid of from a city standpoint is the orange and the red, with the orange color representing 1 to 2 feet of flooding, and then the red representing anything more than 2 feet of flooding. So if you could tell, so the red circles represent cities' areas of concern, specifically what we're trying to target with this project. And the areas in blue are property of the school district that is improved by this project as well.
So this is the softball field, right? Right here. And then the parking lot's down here. Just to give you, make sure you know what areas you're looking at.
And this is for a 1% chance storm, which is a very, very large, somewhat rare occurrence. But flooding would be improved even with smaller storms that we aren't necessarily modeling. So even day-to-day storms like we had last week, flooding on the site would still be improved.
When was the last 1% storm? Do we know?
Definitely in 2008, definitely was a 1% chance storm. It was actually, I think most people think it was close to a 500-year storm of that one.
Remember that one?
I think 2018 was the last time Waukesha had a 1%,
Could be.
something like that.
Obviously, that just means the chances of any given year of it occurring is a 1%. Sometimes people call it the 100-year, but that makes people think it's going to be once every 100 years, and that's not an accurate way of describing it, so.
So what we have, and again, we're still a work in process, but the district would need to approve that easement behind the visitor bleachers to run north-south. And then the extension of new drains to the far west end of the campus, they would need, we haven't worked out, do they own the pond, we own the pond, or this easement, we haven't gotten to that level. And then it does include the loss of the auxiliary parking lot, which I've been told by the North High School leadership that they don't need it. There's space there, and that I believe if the enrollment there would have to get back up to 1,200 kids before we think that would be a concern, and they're at 950 or something right now. So that's a big issue, but I'm having North leadership probably triple check that between now and any type of formal approval, just to make sure. And then we would, one thing about unique to North, the auxiliary lots never paid the parking fee. So we'd have to work through that. And actually, when we approve fees for next year, we kind of talked about some ideas that might make that a lot easier as well, district-wide. So the city would vacate their current easement, the red line that we were looking at, the current ditch that runs north-south. And then that ditch would be filled in, and then the fields would be regraded to improve drainage, as we mentioned. And then the softball outfield would also be regraded. There's just a lip there as you get closer to the ditch that just holds that water. So that would also be addressed as part of this project.
And then this is kind of discussing that construction schedule that we had talked about. So phase 1 would be the pond, the ditch, and then some of that piping work south of the field. So we're planning on doing that this winter. And then phase 2, highlighted in the blue, would be the rest of that north-south piping. We're planning on doing that next summer between graduation and school start. And like we said, this is all up in the air at the moment, but we would be sure to work with North High School and the school district to get this construction schedule to try to limit our intrusion on their day-to-day, so. And then, just to get into the finances a little bit, the city received a $2.1 million ARPA funding, with a caveat that it must be encumbered by the end of 2024. So that means our project has to be 100% designed and bid, and we have to have a contract with the contractor. When we originally came to the school district to talk about this project, we estimated it to be a $3.4 million project. That was with minor improvements and minimal flooding reduction. So that did not include the pond or relocating the ditch or any of these kind of extreme ideas that we're presenting today. The 7.4 million is the number for those improvements that we discussed. And typically our flood mitigation projects are around the $2 to $3 million project. So without the ARPA funding, that $7 million project is kind of out of our hands. And even with the ARPA funding, it's still a very, very large project for us. So I guess the city's position at the moment is we're trying to find the balance between where the city benefits and the school district benefits. And I think Darren will talk a little bit more about this, but whether that is land implications and cost implications and financing, we're trying to find a middle ground where everyone can kind of come together and we can construct this project that is a win-win for everybody.
So next steps, continue, well, unless we hear otherwise, we're going to continue with exploratory work with soil borings and that type of preparatory research. And then further define the project details, because it is, a lot of work's gone into it. DPW's come back with several scenarios, and then this latest one that we're talking about tonight, I'm sure took quite a bit of time and effort to bring forward. And then other campus upgrades, we have the fencing we've talked about. Yeah, we want a fence here, but we really don't have a specific plan. We don't have the ponds not done being designed and all those types of things. And then a financing plan, and then eventually the city and SDW would have to approve the project in total, including the financing plan. So, but I thought it was important to bring in, especially with their expertise, to talk about the rationale and the wins for the city and for North High School. So if there's any questions, we're here to answer. There was good dialogue as we were going, so
Mr. Rod?
that was appreciated as well.
Yeah, just a quick question. Would this project need to be approved by the Common Council as well?
Yep.
Okay. Have they been briefed, and are they having conversations around this as well? Or are you waiting to go to them after we have sort of?
So they are aware of the project. We have the funding from 2024 for this project that was approved last year. So they are semi-aware of it. We haven't necessarily gone specifically for approval with the school district, but they are vaguely aware of it.
Okay. Do we have any reason to believe that they would object to any part of this proposal?
Yeah, I think the biggest, and part of the reason why we wanted to do this brief, I think the biggest element of where there could be some concern is the cost. I think you saw that $3 million difference between a couple of the scenarios, so that is what may at the end of the day be one of the biggest questions that would need to be answered on how we approach this project.
So just one last thing, if I could. So I'm just wondering, from DPW's perspective, if this isn't the solution, I know you indicated it would be, minimal improvement. We wouldn't really see any improvement. Does that get you anywhere in terms of reducing the flood potential in that 1% storm from that map that we saw?
We do see some flooding reductions, but it's definitely not as significant as what we've shown you.
Yeah, we only see, for the most part, there were some of those circles. We see a little bit of reduction, for instance, up on Summit and Green Meadow, that intersection. There were some areas that are up by Summit and Grandview, for instance, that benefit from that. But one area that was targeted and was in the report, by the way, when we say areas of concern, were all areas that were identified by residents, not just we came up with ideas,
Right.
but rather these were complaint areas. One of them happens to be at Sherrill Drive, really close to, obviously, the school. That one floods. We can't solve that area at all unless we have this, I'm gonna call it the Cadillac, this big version. It doesn't work otherwise unless we have it. So we have little bits of it. And in fact, it was interesting when we had our conversation, we had both of these sheets out. We had the sheet of the initial and this, I'm gonna call it the interim. And Darren looked at us and he said, unless you showed me that, I'm not sure I really can even see it. And so it's kind of that minimal in certain areas. This was an opportunity especially when the parking lot is what kind of opened it up, the conversation, when Darren said, well, this might be an opportunity. We're like, well, that could be a game changer. Let's check with our engineers. We have some consulting engineers working with us. And this remodeled it and said, well, actually, it does change things quite a bit.
Do we have any concerns about state approval? Do we need any state approval? Do we need anything weird like the Army Corps of Engineers? I mean, that they all of a sudden jump into this kind of, when the trench is so big, you know what I mean?
Yes.
They tend to jump in.
They definitely do.
They do.
We will be working with the DNR.
Okay.
It will require what they call an individual permit, so it takes 90 days to obtain, and it goes through an extensive review process. The Army Corps of Engineers is also involved in that
That's what I thought.
process. Typically, they defer to the DNR's,
Okay.
It's a joint review usually.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
but we will probably receive permits from both of them, if not several permits from the DNR, to get this constructed.
Okay, and then, the channel will be, it's not gonna be concrete, right? It's gonna be natural, right? Okay.
Yep, it may be lined with some of that geo product we were
Yep.
talking about, or native plantings.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
That geogrid, if, correct me if I'm wrong, that geogrid is actually backfilled with soil on top of it, and then you grow whatever you're growing on top of it, so it's not like you see this
Right, no,
artificial looking ditch.
Very familiar with what,
Now, it will, obviously, it's going to be, the idea is it's going to be very straight, it's not going to be a nice meandering.
Yeah,
but
right.
It's partly to tuck it, obviously, along the side.
yes,
So, it looks artificial from the standpoint of it being straight, but.
right, it's, yeah, it doesn't look like a natural stream.
Right.
And what's the flow rate? What flow rate are you expecting out of the, and what's the current flow rate?
The current flow rate is somewhere around 200 CFS,
Oh.
cubic feet per second.
Yep.
We're designing for 860
Okay.
cubic feet per second.
Okay,
And that's with the ditch fully opened up with the pond as the retention
Right.
facility.
okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
the problem without the pond, as you probably can guess, is that trying to, when our engineers looked at it, kind of how all that 800, you get to Michigan and it just blows away Michigan.
Right,
And
yeah.
Michigan, it gets it's already bad enough and it
Yep.
gets worse. So the pond is almost like a buffer system.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, excellent, thank you.
Great, thank you. This was excellent, very informational.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Be in touch.
All right, our next discussion item is the 2022-2023 audit report.
Yes, I handed out to you the management letter and the annual financial report. Each one of you should have a copy. And Christina Domer, who is part of our new audit firm, Lauterbach and Amen, is here to explain how it went for this past year.
Hello. I understand what you're trying to do, get people off to bed and ready to go to sleep right after reading my audit. No. Thank you so much for your time meeting with me today. I promise I will be brief because you have before you things you can read at a later time, and I'm sure you studied up and were ready with rapid-fire questions for me. But we have before you two deliverables, the main audit report, which is titled the Annual Financial Report, and then what we call a management letter or communication to the board. I'm your new auditor. I'm a CPA with Lauterbach and Amen. Thank you for that introduction. I have 20 years of experience working only with governments. So I'm really excited to work with you, and I hear that you picked us because we specialize in government. So I really appreciate the recognition that our firm is one of those unique firms that works solely in this niche. So as far as the deliverables go, my claim to fame is really only the audit report. That is what this whole process is about, and it starts on page 1, and it goes through page 3. And this is really just fancy legal terms for you got what we title and technically as an unmodified opinion. And that's a clean opinion. It means that we looked at the opinion units, which we define in that opinion, your governmental activities and business type activities on the government-wide statements, which you only have governmental activities. That's an opinion unit, and then each of your funds, and then your aggregate non-major funds as a whole. We found that those are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles that are promulgated by, of course, the Governmental Accounting Standards Board and all sorts of other entities, because you also have a single audit, so we follow government audit standards. And we're currently finalizing that process as well. So you got what's called a clean opinion, and in order to obtain this opinion, we go through an audit. And that requires us to not only do the audit testing that you're probably aware of, but we do what's called a review of your internal control processes. We come in, we take a look at basically how things are functioning at the district, and then based on the initial balances that we have from the district's trial balances and your general ledger, we do an analytic, and we go through and we pick various accounts that we also test substantively, as well as analytically. And that's basically what an audit is. And that gets us to the numbers that we have in the rest of the financial statements. So, of course, we help put the statements together, but all of the numbers and information come directly from the district. The best part to read in this whole entire booklet would be on pages 5 through, I would say, let's see, 13 or 12 is where it ends, and that is the management's discussion and analysis. This is just a nice summary of what occurred from the previous year to the current year. So it's got the current year information as well as a comparison to the previous year. I'd say if a parent or anybody that's looking to move into the district has any questions about the financial position of the district, this is a really great place for them to get a summary of what happened throughout the year. And then, of course, that's followed by the basic financial statements, so that's got the detail in there. I'm not going to bore you by going through all of this in the line item detail, but this is what we opined on. So these are the line items that are fairly presented in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. The detail that we present is then based on standards that come from the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. So if you are new to governmental accounting and have seen for-profit financial statements, which a lot of board members, that I present in front of have seen and are used to, the big difference is that's still happening on the front. So this governmental activities that you see on pages 15 to 16, that's your balance sheet. That's got everything you own and everything that you owe. So it's got your capital assets like your land, your buildings, et cetera. And it's also got on the following pages on your operating statement on page 17, the depreciation that is charged on those assets. And then on pages 15 to 16, you can also see all of those long-term liabilities that are related to the Wisconsin retirement system, as well as your stipend pension and your OPEB liability. And those are basically big numbers, right? It's an educated guess of what is due at the end when all of the employees retire. Right, so I know these are big numbers, but keep in mind that the Wisconsin retirement system is the second or third best funded, well-managed plan in the country. So as long as you are paying into that plan what you are supposed to pay into the plan, which they tell you each month, that's about the best thing you can do, and continue doing that. The other, the stipend and the OPEB liability, those are valued by an actuary. So they take an educated guess for what those incremental changes are. So you guys were talking about your pension or your insurance plan earlier, your health care, right? So allowing retirees to stay on your plan after they retire, regardless of whether or not they pay your premium, it does drag your plan costs, or it increases your plan costs, so it does drag your plan down in a way. And that's what these liabilities are trying to show you. So unless you change those plan benefits significantly, those liabilities are not going to change. But that Wisconsin retirement system amount is really not a part of your control. As long as you continue to pay in, it's well managed. Really can't get better than that in this country. So those are the biggest numbers there and the biggest fluctuations. So this still in the front includes everything under the district. So this is still your net worth, which is great. So that's kind of what you're used to with business accounting, full accrual. Then following that is the fund level detail, starting on page 18, going through the operating statement on pages 20 to 21. And those show the funds that you're used to budgeting. Predominantly, of course, the general and special education fund that have the largest fluctuations. And then all of the other funds are non-major based on the standards. So if a fund is big enough, based on some calculations, we have to show it as a major fund in the front. Otherwise, we show it in the back, aggregated together with your other funds. So we do have that detail in here if you are so inclined to take a look. And that presentation for the balance sheet begins at the fund level on pages 68 to 69. And then that kind of continues on with the non-major funds. But the ones we highlight, of course, are the general fund and special education fund. And you can see those presentations. And that's what you're used to budgeting. So those funds are presented on a very close to cash basis we call it modified accrual. So that means that this is going to be what I call like a checkbook fund, right? These are very close to cash, so you're going to align with your budget, and you don't have anything recorded that's on an accrual basis like your assets or your debt or anything like that. So your fund level gives you a great idea of how you're doing liquid-wise for the district, and of course, your budgeting is very close to that. You're starting that process now. And then everything rolls up into that government-wide presentation, adding back all those things you own, like your capital assets, and then subtracting out those other long-term liabilities. And the really only other long-term debt I would say you have is that promissory note. And in addition to that, just your liabilities related to the employees that serve the district. As far as the operating statement goes, you'll see there was just disposal of capital assets listed there, and that's related to some of the changes we had to take a look at this year for the capital asset listing for the district. So we inherited a very detailed listing of your assets, which, as you can guess, may not be in the greatest shape of updates since many, many years back. So we've been working through some of those updates, and we'll continue to do so with the business office as well. So I know that seems like a really big, sort of disposal to throw out there, but because of some of these assets that have been accumulating and disposed of throughout the years, we had kind of a bigger fluctuation there. So I wanted to point it out because it was a bigger item. Other than that, those presentations on pages 19 and 21 actually give you the roadmap to take it from the fund level and take it back to the accrual basis on the government-wide. So it's kind of like taking what's in your checkbook account, right? And then adding in your house, your mortgage, and all of those things. And that's what the detail shows you. And the detail that makes that up is then in the narrative behind in the notes to the financial statements. So I'm not going to get into even more detail than that, but I at least wanted to give you an idea of how everything flows since it's my first time in front of you. And that will hopefully give you a better anchor if you have any questions on the financial statements themselves. The additional document that we give you is the management letter, board communication, and this just describes the audit process and then what our results were. We typically don't, go through any sort of lengthy discussion on the management letter with the board. Typically these are items like you're missing a policy here, or we have some accounting updates coming down the pike, right? We need to be aware of. And that's what a couple of the comments are. And then there were just some nuances that kind of occurred this year as a result of the turnover. As you're aware, there's been a shift in the business office and a shift in auditors. So there's a lot of sort of changeover and information in hands and knowledge. So some of these things will just go away with a couple of these comments here that I just don't anticipate to really be an issue now that we have them. The real only item that you'll be involved in is, I'm sure pretty soon here, you'll be seeing a board policy coming your way for capital assets and how we present them in the financial statements. You'll just be putting in hard copy writing what you're already doing, because there is a policy noted in the financial statements under the summary of significant accounting policies that's been historically followed. So that you can find on page 26. And it says that, you typically are not going to capitalize anything unless it costs $5,000 or more, has a useful life of more than a year, and then there's various separation for depreciation and how long things are, depreciated based on the type of asset that we have in place, site improvements, buildings versus furniture and equipment. So you have this policy because accountants need to follow something, but you've just never memorialized it and had a formal policy in all of your policies that are formalized. So it's the only one we found, and obviously the rest of your financial policies were intact in there. So honestly, this is the one thing we always see because, again, everyone's got it in writing in their financial statements. So many boards just haven't put a formal policy forward. So as you can see, we've gotten really nitpicky with some of those things. But honestly, overall, I would say that you're a significant district. You've got a significant amount of people in the business office to, manage the resources and finances, et cetera. And I think there was a little bit of a turnover that occurred this year, which with new auditors, new staff, et cetera. So the timeline of when everything got finalized was a little bit delayed, but given the resources that we have in place now and kind of the workflow that we've built, I don't anticipate that ever to be an issue in the future. And I think all in all, though, the audit went really swimmingly, even given the challenges that we did not foresee in advance of them occurring. So I appreciate their time, and thank you so much for your time listening to all of this. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have that came up as well as part of your review.
Referring back to page 20.
Okay.
And the idea of the special revenue for special education
Yes.
versus the general fund.
Yes.
What I like to isolate each year is the amount that we have to transfer from the general fund to cover special ed costs.
Yes.
And is that, would you identify what that dollar amount is on page 20?
So the amount that was transferred from the general fund to the special revenue fund was $19,146,882.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I don't see any other questions. I appreciate the update and welcome to the team and the discussion with that. I would highlight that it's, it is audit season, so as going through all of that with even in the corporate industry, the expectation on the transition and change in hands of between auditors and whatnot is nothing that is uncommon. In fact, it's standard practice anytime you change, so as the auditors get a hold of the new business. So I'm grateful for your team's time and obviously a kudos to Mr. Clark's team and all of the effort that we do and go through that, because it is quite a bit of work to go and coordinate, especially when it's a new auditor and trying to get based on it. So we're on time, even if it might be by the skin of our teeth, but deadlines met and
Exactly.
and appreciated.
Yes, and they worked very hard.
Dr. Piasek.
Just, I apologize, I have one clarifying question, comment, but also a comment of gratitude. It's actually nice to see the new format audit reports. You can kind of look at past years and kind of see how things come together, so I appreciate the history and the level of detail. Just regarding this policy around depreciation and amortization, my understanding is I think we just looked at this a couple years ago, so we have the definition in policy. Are you saying that we haven't been identifying those capital assets or
Oh, no.
managing them?
We have been. There's just no formal policy with all of those items. The threshold of 5,000 plus the different components of depreciation. Unless it was just updated.
It's been more of an administrative guideline that we've just put in
Okay.
place.
So what about
Yeah.
policy 7450, which is a property inventory policy? It does define the $5,000 threshold and useful life of more than 1 year.
Does it also show you the classes of assets? Yes. Well, it's buried in that policy that we didn't find. Yeah.
Yeah.
We
We
did
might
just
already
update
be
it.
in compliance and we just weren't aware of that policy. I know we looked for it and you looked for it and maybe we just didn't find it,
Yeah.
so, yeah.
It's possible that I'm misunderstanding something, but I do remember, back when I was on policy committee, that we talked about this, and we also talked about, crowdfunding, because there was a threshold of crowdfunding. I think I'd raised a question about if you cross that threshold of 5,000,
Oh,
but you've
yeah.
crowdfunded, are you also identifying that as capital asset that you need to depreciate? And so I remember looking at this, and maybe we could just take another look at it
Yeah.
and make sure that if there's something
Oh,
that
that
needs to be
sounds right.
modified. So,
Yeah, we just may not have seen it, yeah.
okay.
Sorry, Dr. Piaksa, can you tell me again what number that was?
It's policy 7450, property inventory.
Thank you.
I don't forget numbers, sorry.
Great, thank you so much.
Love it. No, thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
All right, our next discussion item is the monthly budget report.
Yes, I have put out there the information that I usually share with you guys, which includes the health claims payable and the dental claims payable, tax levy. We didn't get many payments this past month because we had received them the months prior. Investment report showing what our going investment rates are. Darren and I did just approve just over a $6 million 9-month investment for return that was going to garner more interest than normal of our funds over at PMA. And so we'll see that, come to fruition in about 9 months or so. And then the budget chart that just shows for March last year versus this year, and continue to give you guys that comparison.
Yeah, that investment was our defeasance dollars from Fund 39, which we're not making payments for a while with those dollars. And what we did, it's pretty much what we're earning in interest now, but the rumor has been consistently, now whether it's true or not, who knows, that rates will start dropping. So we locked in at 5%-ish point for 9 months, and I think some of it was 12 months or something. There was a split there. But we thought we should lock into that 5% interest. It was all CDs, it's all collateralized and everything, so we're good in that regard as well.
Great. Any questions? Yeah, the investment world the rates are still holding.
Yeah, so it might be
The-
a waste of time, but
we'll see what the feds do. They say three drops this year, so
yeah, they keep saying that.
we'll see. Any other questions? Okay, moving on to other business. Is there recommendations for future committee meetings? Mrs. Voigt?
I would like to take a look at the funds balances that are unpaid lunch fees and breakfast fees in the various schools.
And just help me understand why we're looking at that.
At this point, a lot of times the staff try to cover those at the end of the year. And I'd like to see if there's any other way that we can look at addressing some of the really rather large fund balances, the outstanding balances that are in place right now, rather than having that fall on the current staff to try to cover it.
Well, the staff shouldn't be doing that. I appreciate the generosity, but we can talk about with Darren and see where we're going to go.
One of the comments that you just made about the idea of crowdfunding, one of the suggestions was to go to a GoFundMe kind of a way to raise the money. And if that would be the case, I'm sure it's over $5,000 that would need to be raised to cover those funds. And that could get us into a different kind of a situation too, if they would, try to use that as a way to pay. Just alternatives to look at,
Or holding them accountable to pay their bills. But yes, I've got it. So we'll take a look and we'll talk with Darren and administration on whether or not we'll move it forward to agendize. We do have a need to move into executive session pursuant to Wisconsin statutes 19.85, parent 1, parent E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. Looking for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it has been moved and seconded. Tanya, can you take roll call, please? Aye.
Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
Dr. Piasek?
Aye.
Mr. Wad?
Aye.
Mrs. Voigt?
I
Okay, passes 5-0. We are now going into closed session. Darren, are we coming back?
We might.
This is the Finance and Facilities meeting. We are back in session. Mr. Clark, can you take roll call?
Mr. McCaffrey?
Here.
Mrs. Kozlowski.
Here.
Dr. Piasich.
Here.
Mr. Wad.
Here.
And Mrs. Voigt.
I move to approve the SRO contract as presented by the administration.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Passes 5-0. And that concludes the Finance and Facilities meeting for today. The next meeting is Monday, May 6th at 5:30 PM in the boardroom. Thank you.
Thank you.